The scratching started just after midnight, when the blizzard was at its worst, and Alara had finally convinced herself she might survive another night alone in her mountain cabin. She'd been stirring venison stew over the fire, trying to ignore the howling wind that made the wooden walls creak and groan. 4 years she'd lived in this isolated place. 4 years of solitude, broken only by her own voice when loneliness became unbearable. The scratching came again, more insistent, accompanied by a low whine that cut through the storm's fury. Alara froze, heart pounding. Nothing came to her cabin. Nothing ever came here. That was the point of living so deep in the wilderness, so far from civilization that even trappers avoided this region. She'd chosen isolation deliberately after her pack cast her out, searching for a place so remote she'd never accidentally hurt anyone again. The scratching turned to heavy thuds against the door, desperate and rhythmic. Something was out there. Something big. Alara moved toward the door, pale fingers ghosting over rough wood. She was terrified, but she was also a healer at heart, and that desperate sound pulled at something deep inside that 4 years of isolation hadn't killed. She shouldn't open the door. Every survival instinct screamed at her to stay inside, but she'd spent 4 years punishing herself for deaths that maybe, just maybe, hadn't been her fault. The bolt slid back with a metallic click. The door swung inward, and Alara stumbled back as snow and freezing wind slammed into her, along with something else. 10 white wolves poured into her cabin like a flood of winter itself, their enormous bodies filling the small space until she was pressed against the far wall, heart hammering. They were the largest wolves she'd ever seen, each one easily twice the size of normal wolves, with thick white fur that seemed to glow in the dim firelight. Their eyes were various shades of blue and silver, pale and striking. These weren't ordinary wolves. These were shifters. Had to be. But they weren't shifting to human form, which meant they either couldn't or wouldn't. The largest wolf, a massive beast with ice-blue eyes, moved forward slowly. He was at least 4 feet tall at the shoulder, with a bearing that screamed alpha even in animal form. He stopped 3 feet from her and sat, his gaze never leaving hers, waiting. The others arranged themselves around the room, shaking off snow and ice, their movements controlled despite obvious exhaustion. Alara pressed harder against the wall. She should be terrified, should be screaming or fighting. But looking at these magnificent creatures, seeing the exhaustion in their eyes, the way they trembled despite their thick coats, all she could think was that they were dying. They'd been caught in the blizzard, had somehow made it to her cabin. If she turned them away, they'd freeze within the hour, and she'd already caused enough death for 1 lifetime. Alara's curse had started innocently enough. She'd been 20 when Devon, a young alpha from her pack, had fallen in love with her despite her strange appearance. She'd been born different, pure white hair, skin so pale it was almost translucent, eyes the color of ice, and a small frame, even for an Omega. Her mother had died during childbirth, and her father, unable to look at the daughter who'd cost him his mate, had drunk himself to death before Alara turned 3. She'd been raised by her grandmother, a tough old wolf who'd loved her fiercely, but always warned her that being different came with a price. Devon hadn't cared about her appearance. He'd loved her kindness, her skill with healing herbs, her gentle way with wounded animals. When he'd asked her to be his mate, she'd said yes without hesitation. The marking ceremony had been beautiful. Devon had bitten her neck gently, making the bond that would tie them together for life. Alara had felt the connection snap into place, warm and perfect. They'd celebrated with the pack, made love in their new home, fallen asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Devon had been dead by morning. The pack healers said it was a heart attack, sudden and violent, impossible to predict. But Alara had seen the way people looked at her at his funeral, the whispers that followed her everywhere. The pale Omega and her marked mate, dead before the bond could even settle, Cursed. She'd grieved alone, wondering if she'd somehow caused it. But the rational part of her insisted it was just terrible timing. Hearts failed sometimes. It wasn't her fault. Then Riker had insisted on courting her. Riker was a beta, solid and kind, who'd been Devon's best friend. He told Alara he didn't believe in curses, that Devon's death was just bad luck. She'd resisted for 8 months, terrified of losing someone else. But Riker had been persistent and gentle, and eventually she'd given in. The marking ceremony was smaller this time. Riker had marked her at sunset, and they'd spent the night in his cabin. Riker had been dead by dawn. Heart attack, the healers said again. 2 days after marking Alara, that's when the pack turned on her completely. The pale widow, Death's bride, cursed by the moon goddess to kill any male who tried to claim her. The Alpha had given her a choice: leave voluntarily or be executed as a threat to the pack. She'd left that same day, walking into the mountains with nothing but a pack of supplies, determined to die alone rather than kill anyone else. But she hadn't died. She'd survived, found this cabin, and she'd been alone ever since. Now these 10 wolves were in her cabin, their lives in her hands. The decision made itself. Alara spent the next hour checking each wolf for injuries, her gentle hands running through thick white fur. Most were just exhausted and cold, but 2 had deep gashes from what looked like a rock slide. 3 showed signs of severe hypothermia despite their thick coats. She worked methodically, fallings, into the familiar rhythm of healing. She cleaned wounds with warm water and antiseptic herbs, applied salves, used cloth strips to bind the worst gashes. She built up the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. She fed them her entire pot of stew and most of her dried meat. Through it all, the big Alpha never left her side. He followed her from wolf to wolf, watching with those intense ice-blue eyes. The other wolves seemed to take their cues from him, relaxing as he relaxed. By the time she'd finished, Alara was exhausted, and the blizzard had intensified to the point where she couldn't see beyond the windows. Snow piled against the cabin walls, the wind screaming. They'd be trapped here for days. She looked at the 10 enormous wolves sprawled around her small cabin, taking up every available inch of floor space, and felt a laugh bubble up, half hysterical, tinged with exhaustion. 4 years of isolation, and now her cabin was full. The Alpha made a sound that was almost a chuckle, a huffing noise that made his whole body shake. Then he moved to the rug in front of the fire and laid down, his massive head resting on his paws. The others followed his lead, arranging themselves around the room in a loose pack formation. Alara wrapped herself in her warmest blanket and climbed into her small bed in the corner. The big Alpha immediately rose and padded over, settling on the floor right next to her bed, a warm barrier between her and the rest of the pack. She reached down without thinking and buried her fingers in his thick fur. The wolf made a rumbling sound of contentment and pressed closer. Alara fell asleep with her hands tangled in white fur, feeling safer than she had in 4 years. The second day passed in strange domestic rhythm. Alara checked their wounds, pleased to see them healing faster than normal, confirming they were shifters. She talked to them as she worked, her voice filling the silence she'd kept for 4 years. She told them about her grandmother's healing techniques, about the herbs she grew in summer, about the strange peace she'd found in isolation. She didn't tell them about her curse, didn't mention Devon or Riker, or the reason she lived alone. The wolves listened with remarkable attention. They brought her firewood from outside, taking turns braving the brutal storm. They arranged themselves to help conserve heat. The Alpha stayed by her side constantly. By the 3rd day, Alara had started naming them in her head. The Alpha she called Frost, for his coloring and the icy intensity of his gaze. The 2 who always curled together became Snow and Ice, a bonded pair. The others were Storm, Winter, North, Silver, Dawn, Mist, and Cloud. She knew it was dangerous to name them. Naming meant attachment. But she couldn't stop herself. For 3 days these wolves had been her only company, and she'd felt less lonely than she had in years. On the 4th morning, Alara woke to silence. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. Brilliant sunshine streamed through windows. Her heart clenched. They'd be leaving. She sat up and found the cabin empty except for Frost, who was sitting exactly where he'd been when she fell asleep, watching her. They were already gone. All except the Alpha. She forced herself out of bed, not looking at Frost as she moved to the window, staring at the pristine snowscape. 4 feet of new snow had buried everything. Her path to the nearest trading post was completely gone. She heard movement behind her and turned to find Frost padding toward the door. This was it. He was leaving. She forced herself to smile, pretending this was fine, like she hadn't spent 3 days pretending these wolves were her pack. But Frost didn't scratch at the door. Instead, he sat down facing it and made a low, chuffing sound. Almost immediately, the door swung open and 10 men walked in, all completely naked and absolutely stunning. Alara's blanket dropped from nerveless fingers. They were all tall, easily over 6 feet, with the kind of muscular builds that came from years of warrior training. Their hair ranged from platinum to white blonde, and their eyes were the same striking shades she'd seen in wolf form. But it was the man in front who made her breath catch, who made her heart stutter and her wolf howl with recognition. He was the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. Platinum hair fell to his shoulders in thick waves. His face was all sharp angles and strong lines. His body was pure muscle. And his ice blue eyes were fixed on her with intensity that made her knees weak. He was also the Alpha she'd been calling Frost, and he was currently standing naked in her doorway. The man spoke, his voice deep and rich. "My name is Alexander, Alpha King of the Frostborn Pack. These are my elite guard. You saved our lives when you could have left us to freeze. By the laws of the Moon Goddess, I claim you as my intended mate and ask you to join with me as my Luna and Queen." Alara stared, her mind refusing to process the words. Alpha King, elite guard, intended mate, Luna. None of it made sense. "I can't," she whispered, voice cracking. "You don't understand. I can't be anyone's mate. I'll kill you." Alexander rose to his feet, and Alara had to force herself not to step back. He was so big, so imposing, standing there naked and unashamed. He moved toward her slowly, hands raised peacefully. "I know about your curse. I know about Devon and Riker. I know what your pack called you and why you ran. And I know the truth they didn't." Alara's legs gave out, and she sat hard on her bed, staring up at him. What truth? Alexander knelt before her, bringing himself to her level. Ice blue eyes locked on hers. "You're not cursed, Alara. You're blessed. You're a true mate, Omega. One of the rarest gifts the Moon Goddess can give. You can't be marked by just anyone. Your body rejects bonds that aren't meant to be, protecting you from false matings. Devon and Riker died because they tried to force a connection that was never supposed to exist." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "That's not possible. The healers said—" "The healers didn't know what to look for," one of the other men said, stepping forward. He was slightly shorter than Alexander, with silver blonde hair and kind gray eyes. "I'm Sterling, the pack's head healer. True mate Omegas are so rare that most healers never see one. A regular heart attack leaves damage to the heart muscle. A mate bond rejection leaves no physical damage. The heart simply stops because the soul can't bear the wrongness of the bond." Alara looked between them, wanting desperately to believe. "How do you know I'm this true mate Omega?" Alexander reached out slowly and took her hands. His skin was warm against her perpetual chill. "Because I've been searching for you for 3 years. My mother was a seer. Before she died, she told me about the pale Omega who lived alone in the mountains, cursed by her pack, but blessed by the Moon Goddess. She said I'd know you by your appearance and your gift. hair like moonlight, skin like snow, eyes like ice, and hands that heal what others can't. He squeezed her hands gently. We weren't caught in that blizzard by accident, Alara. We were on our way to find you when the storm hit. The moon goddess led us to your door because it was time for us to meet. But what if you're wrong? Alara whispered. What if I mark you and you die too? I can't do that again. I can't lose someone else. Alexander released one hand to cup her face, thumb wiping away her tears. Then don't mark me yet. Let me court you. Let me prove I'm your true mate. We'll take as long as you need, weeks, months, years if necessary. I'll wait forever if that's what it takes for you to trust me. One of the other men cleared his throat. Alpha, we're all still naked and it's freezing. Maybe we could continue this after we find clothes. Alara let out a startled laugh. She'd forgotten the other 9 men were standing there, all nude and probably freezing. Alexander grinned, and the expression transformed his face from intimidating to devastating. Right. Priorities. He looked back at Alara. Do you have spare clothes? My grandmother's trunk, Alara said, standing on shaky legs. They might fit some of you. The next week passed in strange domesticity. Alexander and his elite guard stayed at her cabin, digging out from the blizzard, making sure the structure was sound. They hunted fresh meat to replenish her stores. They repaired storm damage to her roof and walls. They chopped enough firewood to last 3 winters, and Alexander courted her with patience and gentleness that made her heart ache. He told her about his life as Alpha King, inheriting the position at 22 when his parents were killed, the pressure to find a Luna, meeting Omega after Omega who wanted the title, but not him. He told her about his elite guard, Sterling the healer, wise and kind, Asher and River, the bonded pair she'd named Snow and Ice, Finn, Marcus, Leo, Grant, Cole, Adrian, and Sage, each a skilled warrior who'd volunteered to help search for the pale Omega his mother had prophesied about. In return, Alara told him about her life, her mother dying in childbirth, her father drinking himself to death, her grandmother raising her with fierce love despite the pack's suspicion, learning to heal because her grandmother insisted every Omega should have skills, Devon and Riker, and the devastating guilt that drove her into isolation. Alexander listened without judgment, his ice-blue eyes soft with understanding. He never pushed her to talk, but was always ready to listen when she needed to speak. The elite guard treated her like she was already their Luna. They called her My Lady, and bowed slightly when she entered a room. They asked her opinion on pack matters and listened seriously. They brought her small gifts, unusual stones, interesting feathers, perfect pine cones. They were establishing pack bonds, making her feel like she belonged. And it was working. Alara found herself falling in love with all of them, not romantically, but as pack. She learned their personalities, their quirks. Asher was quiet but had dry humor. River was playful and challenged others to wrestling matches. Sterling liked discussing healing techniques. Finn was the best cook, but it was Alexander who owned her heart. She fell in love with him slowly, piece by piece. The way he played in the snow, laughing like a child. The way he insisted on doing his share of chores despite being king. The way he asked permission before entering her space. The way he looked at her like she was precious. Like her pale appearance wasn't a curse, but a gift. 2 weeks after the blizzard, Alara woke to find her cabin empty again. Panic seized her until she saw the note on the table in Alexander's precise handwriting. Good morning, love. We've returned to camp to check on things and gather supplies. We'll be back by evening. There's fresh bread in the basket. You're not alone anymore. I promise. Alara clutched the note to her chest and cried, overwhelmed. She wasn't alone. For the first time in 4 years, she wasn't alone. They returned at sunset as promised, carrying packs full of supplies and wearing huge grins. Alexander swept her into his arms and spun her around. Did you miss us? Maybe a little, Alara admitted, trying to sound casual and failing. She'd missed them desperately. That night, Alexander asked if he could sleep in her bed instead of on the floor. Just sleep, he promised. I won't push for anything you're not ready for, but I want to hold you. Will you let me? She knew it was dangerous, but she was tired of being scared. Yes, she whispered. Alexander's smile could have lit up the entire night. He climbed into her small bed, pulling her against his chest. He was so warm, so solid, so there. I love you, he murmured into the darkness. I've loved you since that first night when you let us into your home despite your fear. When you healed our wounds with gentle hands and sang to us like we were precious. I love your strength and your kindness. I love everything about you, Alara, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Alara's breath hitched. She wanted to say it back, but the words stuck in her throat, blocked by 4 years of fear. Instead, she pressed closer and held him tighter, hoping he could feel what she couldn't yet say. Days turned into weeks. The elite guard rotated between staying at the cabin and returning to their camp, but Alexander never left. He stayed by Alara's side constantly. They fell into an easy rhythm, like they'd been together for years. Alara's gift started manifesting more strongly with Alexander around. She could sense injuries before seeing them, could feel where pack members were hurting. When River twisted his ankle during training, she knew instantly. When Sterling developed a headache, she made him exactly the right herbal tea without him saying a word. Your gift is growing, Alexander observed one evening by the fire. You're becoming who you were always meant to be. Alara looked down at her pale hands. My grandmother said I had the strongest healing gift she'd ever seen. She said the moon goddess marked me pale, so everyone would know I was meant to be a healer, that my coloring was a badge of honor, not a curse. Your grandmother was right, Alexander said firmly. In the Frostborn pack, we honor our healers above everyone except the Alpha and Luna. You'd be celebrated there, not shunned. Something in Alara's chest loosened. A knot she'd been carrying so long, she'd forgotten it was there. Would you really want me as your Luna? Knowing I'm different? Knowing I might never look like a normal Omega? Alexander turned to her, taking her face in both hands, ice-blue eyes intense. Ilara, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Your hair is like moonlight. Your skin is like fresh snow. Your eyes are like glacial ice. You're absolutely breathtaking. I want you exactly as you are. I don't want you to change a single thing. I want the pale Omega who lives alone in the mountains and heals wolves and makes terrible jokes while cooking. I want all of you, forever. Alara kissed him. She couldn't help it. She'd been wanting to for weeks, and his words broke through the last of her resistance. She pressed her lips to his and poured 4 years of loneliness and longing into it. Alexander kissed her back with gentleness that made her want to cry. His lips moved against hers thoroughly, like they had all the time in the world. His hands stayed on her face, cradling her like she was precious. He didn't push for more, just kissed her like she was his entire world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean you believe me? That you're willing to try? I'm scared, Alara admitted. I'm terrified of losing you, but I love you too much to keep running. So yes, I'll try. I'll come to your pack and see if this can work. It will work, Alexander said with absolute certainty, because you're mine and I'm yours, and the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. They left for the Frostborn pack 3 days later. Alara packed her most precious belongings, her grandmother's healing journals, medicine supplies, a few changes of clothes. Alexander promised they'd send people back for everything else, but Alara knew she wouldn't return. Whatever happened, she couldn't go back to isolation. She'd tasted belonging, and she'd never settle for loneliness again. The journey took 5 days through mountain passes and deep forests. The elite guard shifted to wolf form to carry supplies. Alexander stayed human, walking beside Alara and holding her hand the entire way. The Frostborn pack's territory was stunning. They lived in a valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks, with a huge lodge built from timber and stone. Smaller cabins dotted the landscape, smoke rising from chimneys. Wolves in both forms moved through the settlement, all stopping to stare as their alpha king returned with a stranger. Alara's hand tightened on Alexander's arm as they entered the main lodge. Hundreds of eyes watched her, curious and assessing. She saw shock register as they took in her appearance, saw whispers start immediately. She wanted to run, but Alexander pulled her closer, his arm solid around her waist. "Frostborn pack!" he called out, voice carrying through the entire lodge. "This is Alara, the pale Omega of prophecy. She saved my life and the lives of my elite guard during the blizzard. She's been chosen by the moon goddess to be my Luna and your queen. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. She is under my protection and my claim, and she will be treated with the honor due her position." Silence followed, thick and tense. Then an elderly woman with silver hair stepped forward, eyes kind despite her age. "About time you found her, boy. Your mother told me about the pale Omega 20 years ago. Said she'd be the making or breaking of this pack. I see the making in her eyes. Welcome home, child. We've been waiting for you." The old woman's acceptance broke the tension. Other pack members came forward, introducing themselves, welcoming her. Not everyone was immediately warm. Alara could see suspicion in some eyes, but no one was openly hostile. They were willing to give her a chance. The next few months were an adjustment. Alara had to learn pack hierarchy, customs, politics. She had to meet hundreds of wolves and remember names. She had to get used to being stared at, to being the subject of gossip. It was overwhelming, and sometimes she wanted to run back to her cabin. But Alexander was there for every moment. He introduced her to important pack members. He explained traditions and helped her navigate complex situations. He defended her when anyone questioned her worthiness. He loved her publicly and privately, and slowly the pack began to accept her. They saw how she healed their children with gentle hands. They saw how she consulted with Sterling to improve medical practices. They saw how she treated everyone with kindness, regardless of rank. They saw how their alpha king looked at her like she hung the moon. The elderly woman, whose name was Sage, became Alara's unofficial grandmother. She taught Alara about pack history and politics. "His mother saw you in a vision when Alexander was born," Sage explained one afternoon. "She saw a pale Omega who would save her son when he needed it most. She knew he'd have to wait years to find you, but she also knew you'd be worth the wait." Alara's eyes filled with tears. "I just wish I could thank her." "She knows, child. The moon goddess tells her, and she's grateful her son found someone who loves him for who he is, not what he is." 3 months after arriving, Alara finally felt like she belonged. She had friends, responsibilities, purpose beyond survival. She ran the healing lodge with Sterling, training young healers. She advised Alexander on Omega issues. She was becoming a true Luna, even without being officially marked. But the fear still lived inside her. Every time Alexander looked at her with heat in his eyes, every time his hands lingered, every time they kissed until breathless, she felt the terror rise. What if she was wrong? What if he wasn't her true mate? What if she marked him and he died? Alexander never pushed. He seemed content to wait forever. But Alara could see the strain, the way other pack members questioned why he hadn't completed the bond. An unmarked Luna had less authority, less respect. She was holding him back. It was Sage who finally made her see reason. "Child," the old woman said one evening as they watched the sunset, "you're letting fear control your life again. You ran to the mountains because you were afraid of killing someone. Now you're refusing to complete your bond for the same reason. But fear isn't living. Fear is just another kind of death." "But what if I'm wrong?" Alara whispered. "What if you're not? What if you waste years being afraid of something that will never happen? That boy loves you more than his own life." He'd rather die trying to be your mate than live without you. Are you really going to make that choice for him? Alara thought about it for 3 days. She watched Alexander lead his pack with strength and wisdom. She felt how he loved her, patient and constant and unwavering. He was nothing like Devon or Riker. They'd been good men, but wrong for her. They'd wanted her despite her curse, had tried to overcome it through determination. But Alexander didn't see a curse to overcome. He saw a blessing to honor. He understood her gift because his mother had prophesied it. He valued her healing abilities because his pack needed them. He loved her appearance because it marked her as special, chosen, meant for greatness. He was her true mate. She knew it in her bones, in her soul. The moon goddess had led 10 white wolves to her door during a blizzard so she could save them, so they could save each other. On the night of the full moon, Alara went to Alexander in their chambers, wearing nothing but a silk robe. He looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing, and his eyes darkened when he saw her. "Alara," he breathed, standing slowly. "What are you doing?" "I'm ready," she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm ready to complete the bond. I'm ready to be your Luna in every way. I'm ready to stop being afraid and start living." Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with all the passion he'd been holding back for months. "Are you sure? We can wait longer." "I'm sure," Alara said firmly. "I love you, Alexander. I want to be yours completely. I want everyone to know I'm your mate and your Luna. I want the bond that will tie our souls together forever. I'm not afraid anymore." They made love slowly, thoroughly, with tenderness that made Alara cry. Alexander worshipped every inch of her pale skin, murmuring how beautiful she was, how perfect, how precious. When he finally entered her, it felt like coming home, like finding something she hadn't known she was missing, like 2 halves of a soul reuniting. When the moment came to mark her, Alexander paused, his teeth against her neck, giving her one last chance to stop. But Alara tilted her head to give him better access and whispered, "I trust you. I trust us. I trust the moon goddess. Mark me." His teeth sank into her neck, and Alara felt the bond snap into place. It was nothing like what she'd experienced before. This wasn't forcing a connection that didn't want to exist. This was 2 souls recognizing each other, welcoming each other, completing each other. It was warm and right and perfect. And Alexander didn't die. They lay together afterward, Alara's head on his chest, listening to his strong, steady heartbeat. He was alive. He was healthy. He was hers, and she was his. The curse was finally, truly broken. "I told you," Alexander murmured, hand stroking her white hair. "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. Nothing could change that. Not curses, not fear, not 4 years of isolation. Our destiny was written in the stars before we were even born." Alara kissed his chest right over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady beneath her lips. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for loving me even when I couldn't love myself. Always," Alexander promised, "for the rest of our lives and whatever comes after. You're mine, Alara, my mate, my Luna, my queen, my everything." Epilogue. The marking ceremony was held under the full moon 3 days later. The entire Frostborn pack gathered to witness their Alpha King officially claim his Luna. Alara wore a dress made of white fur and silk that seemed to glow in moonlight, her platinum hair adorned with winter flowers. The elite guards stood as honor guards in white formal uniforms, looking like winter warriors from legend. When Alexander marked her again in front of witnesses, completing the public bond, the pack howled in celebration. The sound echoed through the valley, through the mountains, through the entire territory. A song of joy and belonging and new beginnings. Years later, when young Omegas came to Luna Alara feeling cursed or different or unwanted, she'd smile and tell them her story. About living alone for 4 years in a mountain cabin. About 10 white wolves scratching at her door during a blizzard. About choosing to help them despite her fear. About falling in love with an alpha king who saw her blessing instead of her curse. I thought I was cursed, she'd tell them, taking their hands and looking into their eyes. I thought my appearance and my gift made me dangerous. I thought I was meant to die alone to protect everyone else. But the moon goddess had different plans. She marked me pale so my true mate would recognize me. She gave me healing gifts so I could save his life. She led him to my door when I'd given up hope. Everything I thought was a curse was actually a blessing I hadn't learned to see yet. She'd introduced them to Alexander, still tall and strong, looking at her with the same love he'd shown that first morning after the blizzard. Sometimes the right person doesn't come when you're ready for them. They come when you need them most. When you've given up, when you're sure you're meant to be alone. That's when the moon goddess shows you that you were never cursed. You were just waiting for someone brave enough to see your blessing. And those young Omegas would leave her presence standing taller, believing more firmly that their differences weren't weaknesses, but strengths waiting to be discovered. That isolation was temporary. That somewhere out there, 10 white wolves might scratch at their door during a blizzard, and their entire life would change. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. This week, I'm giving away 1 month of free access to all my Patreon content, exclusive stories, bonus chapters, and a special one linked to this episode. Just leave a comment below with your favorite quote from today's story, and I'll announce the winner in my next video. Good luck.